Hello, Varun here from the Red Music Box, and let's talk about pre-production. In my total honest opinion, if there is one thing that changed my music making skills, I would attribute that to pre-production. Let me tell you a quick story. I play for a folk rock band called Swaratma, and we have been around for the last close to 12 years. And we have about 3 full-length albums and a bunch of singles that we've released over the years. And back then, my music making skills were really low. I did not understand music production as much. I did not know how recording softwares worked or how to place microphones, what are the different types of microphones, and so on and so forth. So when we entered the studio back then to record our album, we walked in completely blind. We had no clue what was happening. We certainly had the notion that anything is possible in a recording studio. And to varying degrees, of course, not all of us understood things the same way, but to different degrees, we definitely thought we can make anything possible in a studio. And the main thing that we lacked is pre-production. We never did this. We skipped this step completely. And what happened is, thankfully, we had some really good friends who helped us both in our first album and the second album to pre-produce our work, or to play the role of a producer who helped us shape the song just about the time we were recording it. And that massively helped the way the albums sounded. Or if not for these two people, namely Amit Kilam from Indian Ocean, who produced the first album, and Loy Mendonza from Shankar Ehsaan Loy, who produced the second album, if these two gentlemen were not present with us in the studio to help us through our tracking and our production process, honestly, I don't think our albums would have sounded even half as good as it did. It was not because of the engineering skills, but I'm mainly referring here to the songwriting skills. So pre-production is a very important role to play. And it was after these experiences that I started paying more attention to music production. I started paying more attention to the role that a producer plays. And I worked actively. I took time out and I worked on these skills to develop these things in me. And fast forward now, many years down the line, it's really paying off. Thankfully, I've had some amazing people who have helped me and guide me and teach me these things, which has helped me and shaped me so much as a producer now that I'm able to provide the same skill at the Red Music Box when people walk in here to record with me. We certainly live at a time of a lot of information and almost everything is available online, but somehow some of these key things which like pre-production itself, somehow for some reason I feel like it gets ignored a lot. I don't see so many videos talking about this. It's not a common thing. Somehow people leave this step out quite often. And honestly, I don't understand why, because it's the single most thing which makes your album or your songs sound really good before you enter the studio. In a nutshell, pre-production is the final stage before you enter a studio and start laying down your tracks. This is a stage where the technical and the creative process meets each other. And this is where you try to piece everything together and get a final feel of how your tracks are sounding. You could look at this as a company doing a product launch rehearsal, a final rehearsal of their product launch, or sometimes even a wedding rehearsal. It's the last thing that you do just right before the wedding day to make sure everything goes super smooth. So that's what a pre-production stage does to your music. Let's dive into the steps. Step number 1. If you have not thought about a producer, or if you were considering and had two thoughts about it, or two minds about it, then this is a stage where I would highly recommend and suggest that you involve a producer. It's very important that you bring somebody that you truly trust who can help you in your album or in your recording stages, help you get the best out of your performances in the studio, and also constantly, while keeping in mind the the final product, the vision of the final product. That's what a good producer does. And it's important that you bring in somebody that you really trust, because this is a vulnerable journey. There's going to be a lot of discussions. It's very important that you discuss the mood of your songs, the lyrics, the arrangement. You talk through all these things. If you have references in mind, and what do you think you want your album to sound like, what are some of your thoughts behind these songs, it's really important to bring these things before the producer, and you guys try to agree with each other. And there are going to be moments where the producer might disagree with what you have and might suggest a different path. Now, it's really important that you try and trust the producer during these steps. Now, oftentimes there could be a little bit of a friction, but it's important that you try and go with the producer and trust the person is looking out for the best interest in the overall sense. So here's an example of a track which is a part of a full-length album that I worked on just briefly before the lockdown happened. So this is by an artist called Bhavna, and the tracks are unreleased yet. She plans to release them sometime soon, I hope. So when she first reached out to me, she had about 8 to 10 songs, and she asked me if I could produce her album. And so I obviously needed to hear the song, so I asked her to send me real rough recordings. It could even be phone recordings. And this is one of the tracks that she shared with me.
चांदनी पिघली जा रही है, सांसों में उस भरी है, ठंडी सी बस एक तेरी कमी है, हल्की सी.
Now, when we met at the studio and we tried to work on these tracks further, we did a few things to it. First thing is we sat and worked on the chords, because Bhavna is not a guitar player. She uses guitar to help her with her songwriting. So we had to kind of work on the chords and see if we could make it a little more interesting than what she had already chosen to use. And apart from that, we felt the strumming pattern was perhaps not complementing the track. So we decided to go ahead with a simpler plucking pattern. And after we worked on those, she also had references, which is a very important thing to mention. She had a fairly clear idea of what was she expecting out of these tracks, and roughly the kind of vibe that she wanted to create in these songs. So after we did all of that and we spent some time, I put a mic in the studio between the two of us, and I just played the guitar while she was singing, and we recorded this over a click, which kind of also became a guide track for me to start laying down the instruments and arranging the song for her. And this is what that was like. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see there, I also have a markers laid down on my track, on my session after the track was done. So that kind of helped me understand what is the structure of the song. And it was important that we discuss these things. We went back and forth and figured if the tempo of the song was right or wrong. Is the key comfortable enough for her to sing? We had to make sure that all these things were perfectly fine before we went ahead and fully arranged the track. And once the arrangements were done, final mix or the final arrangement sounded something like this.
एक शाम आई है, क्या समा रंग क्या लाई है, सांसों में उस भरी है, ठंडी सी बस एक तेरी कमी है, हल्की सी
Okay, so I hope that gives you an idea of how pre-production really helps you in your music making skills and how it kind of helps you avoid a lot of problems. Now, of course, as a musician or an artist, you don't always need to have a complete idea of how your arrangement needs to be done. Even in case of Bhavna, when she reached out to me, I had to spend time having these conversations to understand, which helped me arrange the track for her, which helped me play the guitar parts on this entire album. So that's kind of how that's the role what a producer plays and helps you through your music. So I hope this gives you a more practical example of how things work. Step number 2 is finding the right engineer. Now, the reason I say the right engineer is, of course, there are a lot of good sound engineers there, and most of them are really good at what they do. But you really want to find somebody who might have some kind of an experience working in the similar genre of music that you want to record. Because every genre of music has a certain skill set that they use to get a certain kind of tones and get a certain kind of vibe going on. And it's really important that you try and find an engineer who understands you as an artist, who also gels and works really well with your producer. Now, sometimes this person can do the role of both engineering and producer, which is what I do at Red Music Box. So it's really important that you find somebody who works and understand with you. Now, and again, the same processes. Discuss your songs extensively with the engineers. Give your references to them. Help them understand what exactly are you looking for. What is your vision of the final product of your songs? Very important to discuss this with your engineer. At the Red Music Box, since I play the role of both being a producer as well as an engineer, it helps me avoid a lot of miscommunication or communication gaps between the two roles that two different people play in some cases. And I've had the experience of this before, and I've seen how sometimes the process can somehow destroy the songs. Somehow there's a little bit of a communication gap, and the vision is a bit different, and in between all of this, it's the songs that tends to suffer. Step number 3, work on your tones. I cannot stress enough that tone is a very important thing. Whether you're a drummer, whether you're a guitar player, tone plays a huge role in what you wish to communicate. Now look at it this way. You might have some amazing choice of notes and some really good chord progressions, a great sounding melody, and some fine, well-written lyrics for your song, but you choose bad tones for your instruments, and somehow you fail to connect with your audience. And this is a very common problem. So it's natural and important that you work on tones. So discuss your tones with your engineer again. This is where the producer and engineer again comes in really handy. There could be certain ways of achieving certain tones that you might not really be very sure, but you have a mental image of what you wish your instruments would sound like on the final record. I think it's very important that you discuss these things again. So commit to your tones right in the recording stage. So it's very important that you plan this well beforehand, before you walk into a studio, and then you begin to wonder if you got the right guitar, if you got the right amp, and stuff like that. Which brings me to the 4th point: discuss gear. Very important. Once you have committed to a certain kind of tone and how you're planning to achieve this tone on your step 3, the next thing you want to make sure is you have the right gear which allows you to achieve certain kinds of tones. Now, this could mean hiring the right kind of drum kit, making sure, especially the snare drum, if you want a deep, fat sounding snare, then there's no point if you turn up to the studio with a piccolo snare, or if you turn up with something that's not so deep enough and doesn't have that fatness. Sometimes you may want a simple accessory, something like a big fat snare drum, which I use in the studio sometimes when I want to record really fat snare drums. And it's really important you have all these tiny little things. It could be small accessories. It could be a certain kind of drumstick that helps you play better, that helps you play more efficiently, that helps you get the kind of tone that you're looking for. It could be guitar amplifiers, it could be the right kind of pedals, it could be a whole bunch of things. Even guitar pickups, the choice of pickups that you have on your guitar. Do you want to be using a single coil pickup guitar, or do you want to be using guitars with humbuckers on it? It's very important that you try and somehow work these things through. Even choice of microphones in some cases, if you're looking for something very specific, it's important that you discuss these things with your engineer and producer before you step into the studio. Hey guys, here's a little piece that I worked on for an advert many years ago. I just pulled this out again to use it as an example to demonstrate how tones could affect your music. You get the idea. Now, if we had to change this upright bass to maybe something like a thumb bass, and let's maybe pull the volume down because it's going to be louder than the upright. Maybe let's try a fingerstyle bass and see what happens. See, it's just doesn't have the same feel. It changes the vibe of the track. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get across to you guys. When you are using any kind of tones that you wish to commit before your recordings, you have to try and get that right in the pre-production stage, because without committing to the right kind of tones and discussing this and thinking this process through, you are going to be in a lot of trouble during recording stages, especially if you don't have the right kind of gear to complement what you need, and then you end up being unhappy with the final product that you get. Step number 5. All of these things are going to fall flat if you have not ensured that you're practicing your parts really well. Now, it's very important that in the pre-production stage, you go through all your parts of the song. You go through every section of your song, the intro, the verse, the chorus, and whatever instrument each of you are playing in the band, you have to be able to play those parts as flawlessly as you can and as accurately possible over a metronome. Now, many bands are great sounding bands. They're fantastic when they're playing live, but somehow when they walk into a studio, you see that they struggle playing over a metronome. It's playing over a click track is not something that comes very naturally for a lot of these musicians. And I think it's important that you practice playing over click, that you make it a habit, that you grow comfortable playing over a metronome or a click track, because that very much helps you in getting your parts really tight and achieving a nice, well synchronized performance in your recording stages. Step number 6: do not make the mistake of writing parts that are not possible for you to play. Now, this is again a common issue that many a times I see in studios. You're working on a certain part for your song, and you're somehow managing to get by playing it in your jam room, and but when you hit the studio and when you're sitting there in front of a metronome and you're playing, you're struggling with those parts. You're just not able to keep time. You're just not able to swing enough or groove enough. I mean, you're struggling. Maybe if you're a guitar player, then you're struggling with the strumming pattern. If you're a bass player, maybe your right hand is not working enough or accurately picking the notes in time. There could be a lot of issues. So try and make sure that you're always picking stuff or writing parts for your song which is somewhere in the ballpark area of your skill level. Of course, the idea is to push yourself. Every time you write a new song, you try and see if you can learn something new and if you can push yourself to do something new and different. But Be realistic about your skill levels. Understand where you are and what your skill levels are, and try to compose your music parts in such a way that it's possible for you to go and play really well in the studio. Step number 7, this is more of a tip that I received from multiple people, and I just want to share this with you because it has helped me a lot and has remained with me through all these years. Tip number 1 that I received was from Loy Mendonza when he produced the second album for us. He said, if you want to sound like your dream band, then you got to play like your dream band. Now, it's very important if you think about this, unless and until your performance is on par, and your performance is on par to some of the musicians that you are aiming to sound like, it's very difficult for you to get a recording or an album or final product which sounds as good as theirs. Tip number 2 is a tour manager back then who was managing the band and helping us with gigs and bookings. Bobby from OML shared this when we found ourselves struggling to decide if we were prepared enough to go into a studio and record the album. He said this to us: an album is a snapshot of what the band sounds like right now. And I think that was very important for us to hear, because it honestly broke a lot of inhibitions that we were carrying. And also, it helped us understand and be more realistic of what to expect from the studio, what to expect from ourselves on the album. Otherwise, I often see bands getting into a studio with extremely unrealistic expectations, record your stuff, get it mixed, and when your mixes are arriving, you're discouraged, you're disappointed, you're blaming the gear, or maybe you're blaming the engineer, or maybe you're blaming the producer, or I don't know what you're blaming. But the truth is, if you spend some time with yourself and ask yourself honestly, you know what the right answer is. It was never the gear, it was never the producer, it was never the engineer, as much as it was about your performance in the studio. So if you can get this right, I think a lot of the other steps will become way, way easier. I hope these examples serves as an encouragement for you to keep pushing harder, work on your skills, and don't get into self-doubt and break your head over it. And if you're willing to put in the hours and work really hard, I'm sure all of this is easily achievable, guaranteed. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I'm super encouraged by some of the comments and messages that I have been receiving from you all, and thank you for a lot of people who responded to my message the last week and subscribed to my channel and agreed to check out the videos and left some really nice messages. Very encouraging and very heartwarming to see that. If you enjoyed this video, do the usual things. Hit the subscribe button, ding the bell so you're notified, leave your comments and your thoughts below, and I will be reading and I'll be responding to them. Stay safe, and see you soon in another video. My name is Varun from the Red Music Box, and do not forget to create, play, and record.